One of the things that we've done over the last kind of 10, 15 years as we raise our children is we've raised them to be more individualistic. We're more asset obsessed than we've ever been before. Our parents wanted the house, the kitchen, in the UK, the conservatory, in Australia, the pool. But now we're raising our kids to be way more individualistic. Is you need to get what you need. What's important for you. And I'm not saying that's completely wrong, but it's driven a particular way of thinking. And so, we saw it in work where all of a sudden millennials got into work and as parents were like, oh, find a company that, shares the values that you have, find a job that really lights you up. When I was growing up, it was get a job. And if you get a job, you're really lucky to have a job. And so I really thought about how would that play into this scenario. And again, it all comes back to upbringing. It all comes back to messaging and really thinking about the stories that we share with our own children and the expectations that they have.
My name is Simon Waller, and this is the Future with Friends podcast, a show where I make zero attempt to try and predict the future, even though I'm a trained futurist, and instead I enlist my friends to do it for me. Thankfully, I have some very smart and insightful friends. Some of them are best-selling authors. Most will be considered leading thinkers in their field of expertise. I guarantee that every single one of them will have compelling and unique insights to share about what might happen next. Each episode, I invite a friend onto the show to explore the future of anything that they would like. I then task them to go away and create a short scenario about that future set at least 5 years from now, something that captures their hopes and dreams or maybe their fears and concerns. And then over the course of the show, we dissect that scenario. We start to think about the critical uncertainties, the alternate possibilities, and the decisions that we can make today to create the future that we want tomorrow. Welcome to The Future with Friends.
Hello and welcome back to The Future with Friends. In this episode, I'm joined by a very old friend of mine, the incredibly suave and sophisticated Colin Ellis. I met Cole probably about a decade or so ago, and I just remember him being dressed in like the most dapper of suits. One of the few people I know that still likes to get around in a three-piece with a tie and a pocket chief. This episode that Colin and I created explores the future of analog. And there's obviously an interesting juxtaposition in that idea, the future of analog, the future of something that we associate with the past. And in this episode, Colin explores the idea of what would it take for us to turn our back on some of the modern technologies and the modern conveniences that we've now kind of come to take for granted. What would it take for us to turn us back on those things and return to a simpler time? The challenge around this episode for me was, I'm at an age where nostalgia starts to set in, and the idea of the 90s being the best decade, well, it seems pretty clear to people in my generation, but perhaps it's different from those around us. And how do we separate the nostalgia from the deeper truth around what this age represented and the simplicity or the right balance of simplicity and complexity that perhaps we experienced at that time? You're going to love Colin's scenario, and I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation that the two of us have afterwards. For me, this was very special and a great opportunity to catch up with a very dear friend who now lives on the other side of the world. But please enjoy this episode of The Future with Friends. Hello, and welcome back to The Future with Friends. Today, I'm being joined by a very old and very dear friend of mine, Colin Ellis, Cole. We were just talking in the preamble to this, and he was just like, thank God this is not a culture podcast.
Oh my God, that makes me sound terrible. Like I hate my job. I love my job, but I've done a lot of those.
No, I don't think I didn't take it that you hate your job. In fact, I know you love your job and you are deeply invested in culture for organizations. I took it as being the problem of culture podcasts, but and again, I don't even know someone who's got one. But
if that's one takeaway from this podcast, yeah, culture podcasts need to improve. Yeah.
We did a little test recording just beforehand, and Cole was sounding really intelligent as he talked about, the war in the Middle East. And it was like, well, it's kind of almost a pity that we wasted that 90 seconds.
I love it. He sounded really intelligent, but
Yeah,
just for
yeah.
90 seconds.
Well, to be fair, Cole, you've always sounded very intelligent to me.
Thank you, Simon.
I think we've known each other now for close to a decade.
hmm
And I don't know your memory of when we met, but we were at a professional development program together. And you and another friend of ours, Jason Fox, were competing to be who was the most dapper gentleman in the room. Like, you both have a propensity for kind of, suits and pocket chiefs and things like that. I still would hate to hazard who won that, except I caught up with Jace recently, and he's kind of now he'd gone to kind of linen shirts and a little bit more bohemian in his look.
What?
Yeah, I know.
That's not the Jason I remember.
No, and I was expecting you to turn up in a pair of three-piece pajamas because you are in the UK and it's like 8 o'clock in the morning for you there. It's quite early still. But as you mentioned, this is kind of this is future Cole. This is dressed down version of Cole.
Right. Yeah.
Retired almost.
Whoa, I'm never doing that. Yeah, I just
No.
didn't think it was appropriate to appear on a podcast in a pair of silk pajamas, a silk robe, and have my valet bring me a silver tray with tea on it. Just wasn't appropriate for this podcast.
Fair enough. That's again another type of podcast again. Probably not the culture one either, but yes, we're here though on the Future with Friends, which is basically an excuse for me to catch up with very smart friends of mine and talk about the future of something interesting. And so we chatted. I know we hadn't spoken for a bit because obviously you moved back to the UK. Was it middle of last year or so? Was that about right?
Yeah, so I launched the book in mid 24, spent 3 months in the UK, and at that point, and wife and I had been discussing moving back, but at that point, I basically came back home, we packed up and we moved back. So that was the end of 2024, Simon. Yeah, so we've been here
so it's a bit over a year
14,
now.
15 months. Yeah.
But yeah, we used to obviously we both lived around Melbourne before that. We used to hang out at whiskey bars and do cool things. And we've always had this really interesting intersection of interest. And probably one of those has always been around things like music and vinyl. And so when I spoke to you, I was like, hey, Cole, do you want to come on the podcast? And I asked you if you could talk about the future of absolutely anything. It was probably a little bit unsurprising when you said, the future of analog.
Yeah, it was so me that to talk about the future being the actual past. So yeah.
Well, that. So we actually did an episode with Michael Dixon called "The Future of the Past," which was an interesting take on things like Indigenous wisdom. And obviously, we're going to get to your scenario in a bit. And this is a very different thing. In some ways, it's a more recent past. In some ways, it's almost like a nostalgic version of the past when we talk about analog. When when I gave you this carte blanche to talk about the future of absolutely anything, why this? Like, what was it about this topic that you felt so compelled to explore?
So there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, driven by my own son. So my own son, he's 20 in May, and last year he gave up his smartphone for a dumb phone. He now buys DVDs. He point blank refuses to get any kind of streaming service. He's buying CDs. Now that we're back in the UK and now we've unboxed everything that got shipped over, I've got my vinyl out again. So, I really enjoyed reading the paper whilst listening to records at the weekend, Simon. And so there's been a slight shift, a slight movement. And in my head, I thought, what would happen if this movement gained momentum? I just want to make the point, our daughter's 19 and she has not made the analog movement. But I just thought it'd be really interesting to explore, well, what would happen if this gained some legs? So yeah, that's why I chose it.
Yeah, so there's some interesting things you just said there. I got into the habit of buying vinyl for my girls. Probably about 5 years ago. And for me, it was about something about like some music is so special you need to own it. Like you need to almost stake a bit of your identity on it, which doesn't really happen with streaming services as we all own everything. So what does it that actually really matters? But even what you just said there about that, reading the paper and listening to vinyl, one of my great memories of growing up, I used to go to my friend Ben Deverell's house. And Ben's dad was an absolute audiophile. Like he used to make his own valve amplifiers.
Wow.
And he was engineer by trade. And the thing about going to Ben's place is if you ever slept over there on a weekend, in the morning, on a Saturday or a Sunday, there was kind of this hour block in the morning, which was his dad's time. And when it was his dad's time, he would put something like Pink Floyd on, like the turntable. And he had this one chair, which was right in the center, like the perfectly positioned between the speakers. And he would have his coffee and he would have his paper. And like for that time while the record is playing, it's like, just do not disturb. Like there is nothing that the house could burn down. And he would be like, do I really like have to? Oh, very inconvenient. Anyway, so I've kind of been the same. Like for us on Saturday mornings, music is like choosing the record to play. Feels like part of the ritual of our kind of Saturdays and our Sundays as well, which I really love. So there's something in that which really resonates with me. So we're going to jump into the scenario in a second.
Can I just add one thing just to that very quickly, Simon? Yeah. And you kind of mentioned how we met, and there was a close-knit group of us, you, me, Michael, and listening to Michael talk. I could listen to Michael talk all day, Jason. I remember, and so Henry Ford in the 1920s created this thing called the Vagabonds, and it was him, Edison, Firestone, Burroughs, and what they used to do was
this parallel, by the way, just
yeah. they used to go away on these camping trips and talk about the future and talk about the past, and I felt that was very much what we tried to do, albeit completely unwittingly at the time. And so when I kind of reflect on how we met, when I reflect on some of the conversations that we had at group, and in a way, I would have loved us to have done one of those trips. It was very much about, and Jason was a good one for talking about this too, is how do we leverage the past to think about the future, but without letting go of the past? And that's not to say we stay rooted in the past, but we have this sense of where we came from, origin story, all of these kinds of things. So that, when you talk about kind of Zeppelin and all these for my daughter, it was the Smiths. That was my group in the UK. I wanted my kids, just like you wanted your kids, to have a real appreciation for where we've come from, but as a mechanism for squeezing as much as we can out of the future. Sorry, I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting, I think a very good insight. I think that we definitely live in a world where we are obsessed with novelty and we're very quick to dismiss the past for the future. And I think that in that quickness, we often risk losing things as well. So taking the time to be a little bit more considered about what is it that we actually let go of and what is worth retaining is, I think, is part of like those conversations that we've had, but also in some ways, maybe that's part of like, the what sits behind this scenario in a way. So tell me beforehand, with the scenario, as part of the kind of the creation of one of the conversations that comes up about, well, how far in the future are we going here? Because the further we go into the future, the greater the possibility, the great difference we can have. This actually starts in the very near future, but where does it get to? Like, where would you? What's the significance of the timeframes around this for you?
Well, I wanted, because what we've seen in the last probably 15 to 20 years is this acceleration of social change where, and I talk about it within my work, is you only need one thing to happen over here. And, things like Time's Up, Black Lives Matter, these kinds of things, which ironically were driven by technology, which is the thing that I'm talking about, is that, they happen very, very quickly because we build social movements quickly. So my scenario starts kind of in 2024, and gets to 2035, because I feel that, as a world, we take to change much quicker than we maybe did in the past, because we were throttled in the past by our own history and the fact that the pace of change was so slow. But actually, the pace of change has been so fast. I felt that this could all be possible within 10 years.
Yeah, and this is something that we'll definitely get into as part of the discussion after you've read it, because that was the stuff that probably really challenged me around this. Is I was starting to go, okay, like if Cole was right, like if this was to occur, like how does this transpire? I think this is all going to make much more sense if people have heard the scenario first. So what I'm going to do
Yes.
now is I'm going to throw the microphone to you. I know you've actually got your own one there, but I'm going to let you to read your scenario from the beginning to the end, and then we're going to jump into a bit more of a conversation around all the content within it. So over to you, Cole. Please read us your scenario about the future of analog.
In 2024, researchers at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology strapped 256-channel EEG sensors to students and asked them to either write or type. The results were stark. When students wrote by hand, the whole brain lit up: visual regions, sensory processing areas, the motor cortex. When they typed, a much smaller, far less connected network activated. The lead researcher, Audrey van der Meer, put it simply: the most surprising thing was that the whole brain was active when they were writing by hand, whilst much smaller areas were active when they were typewriting. The inference was clear: analog good, reliance on technology bad. Three things then converged in 2024-25. The Norwegian research came out the same month that South Korea published its devastating teen mental health data, linking smartphones to unprecedented depression rates. Then Stanford University released a study showing average adult attention spans had collapsed to 47 seconds. Suddenly, parents, teachers, and workers all had scientific validation for what they'd been feeling. Sales of the book Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff skyrocketed as people strive to learn more about the practices of technology companies. But research alone doesn't create movements. The real catalyst was the 2027 seatbelt moment, when a leaked TikTok internal document revealed that algorithm deliberately targeted children's insecurities to increase engagement time. It was technology's tobacco moment, and movements were spawned around the world. Van der Meer's brain scans became the movement's visual symbol: the dead zones when typing versus the alive brain when writing by hand. The image went viral, ironically, on the very platforms it condemned, and suddenly everyone recognized what they'd lost. Social media bans for teenagers, which until then had been limited to a few countries, became widespread across the world because of the mental health issues they generated. Improvements promised by tech giants through AI failed to materialize, and we started to recognize the impact that smartphones had had on our attention and focus. People everywhere started to rediscover what it means to be analog. They lost their sense of immediacy, where every notification demanded their instant attention. Some people really struggled with this, and digital disassociation became a new field of psychiatric support. Of course, the shift wasn't seamless, and for many it was extremely difficult. Parents of disabled children lost vital communication tools and GPS tracking for wandering kids. Long-distance families struggled. Grandparents couldn't see grandchildren's faces on video calls. Migrant workers couldn't send money home as easily. Traveling became harder without translation apps and instant bookings. Some people lost jobs entirely. The entire influence economy collapsed, although this was also celebrated, as did food delivery drivers. Also, the public photographic record of people's lives was lost, as was a description of their eating habits. Realizing that this wasn't a small social movement, the tech giants launched the Digital Dignity campaign in 2030, funded by Apple, Google, and Meta, to try and draw confidence and users back. They highlighted every crime where a victim couldn't call for help, every lost child who may have been tracked. And of course, they spent millions lobbying government hard, warning of economic catastrophe. Sony did indeed pivot back to the Walkmans. The 2031 model became a real cult item. Streaming services like Spotify fought viciously, pushing hybrid devices that were smartphones in all but name. For music artists, it split down the middle. Musicians thrived as live music became currency again and ticket prices soared. But visual artists and photographers who'd built careers on Instagram faced ruin. By 2033, some were lobbying for professional exemptions to the smartphone rejection, arguing their livelihoods depended on it. The movements largely rejected this as the thin end of the wedge. By 2035, sales of magazines, paperback books, DVDs, and vinyl had a huge resurgence, as did MP3 players. Fewer and fewer people were recording concerts on their tiny phones, choosing to be present in the moment instead. And the pubs of England, which for years had faced serious decline, became community hubs once more as people met face to face to talk about their work, relationships, and the future. My own life, once dominated by incessant emails, social media notifications, and peer pressure to be always on, became immeasurably better. It was difficult to begin with. As an early adopter, the trend was one that I monitored for about 6 months before going all in. I replaced my smartphone with a dumb phone and bought a street map. I still miss the ease of Google Maps. I became more aware of my surroundings. Instead of listening to a podcast on my run, I heard the sound of birds instead. I carried a slim wallet with me instead of my phone. That felt easy to do, and started to notice how many more people were talking to each other rather than staring at their phones. The parks now are full of curious children. Road deaths have been reduced as distractions did too, and being caught on a smartphone is now seen as the most uncool thing to do. So where are we now? Well, the smartphone-enabled harassment culture died with the devices. People seem more globally aware even without constant news feeds. Mental health is discussed openly, and neurodivergence now understood better. But there's also residual behavior. People still occasionally check their dumb phones for text, though it's considered mildly rude. Some pubs have phone parking by the door, little wooden boxes where you can deposit your Nokia, new for 2030. The jukebox is back, but it's digital instead, just controlled manually. And there's a new social skill. People have relearned how to sit in comfortable silence. In 1995, silence meant something was wrong. In 2035, it just means you're thinking. It doesn't feel like the 1990s all over again, as a new reader suggested in 2032. Instead, it feels like we've been reawakened, like in that movie, Cocoon. Alive and aware of the beauty around us for so long we'd ignored. The desperate tech companies' PR machines have been peddling the same messages for 5 years now about how not having technology in our hands is a bad thing. Yet for me and the people around me, it feels that analog is here to stay.
Awesome. By the way, I could listen to you read the back of a Wheat Bix packet. Like, you're just like,
thank you. Someone said to me at a conference one time, she was like, "Oh, I just want to say I love the fact that you read your audio books. I was listening to the other day and I just drifted off." I'm like, yeah, that's not a good thing.
It's like, and if you like the voice, it means it was probably the content.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. So beautifully delivered, by the way. And gosh, there is so much to talk about in this. But before we get into the deep dive, I'm curious, like, I kind of throw these challenges out to people. Hey, come in, write a scenario about the future. And this is for many the first time they've ever been asked to do something like this. I think you mentioned that just before we jumped on the podcast recording. It's like, I've never done anything like this before. Tell me what the experience was like. How did you go about it? What were the frictions that you found in this process?
Well, you very kindly sent over some instructions, which I read diligently because I literally had never done anything like this before. I'm used to writing about the present, what we see in front of us, what's immediate right now. And so I found it fascinating. And you'd made some suggestions about how I could use AI, but I didn't want to do that. I was like, no, I want to write this about what I actually took a walk out. I went past a pub that was closed not far away from here. And there's that's a real issue in the UK right now. And I tried to imagine, kind of what it would take for this scenario to to eventuate. So I loved the process. I think I put it in an email that, oh my gosh, I could totally write a book on this. And so I loved the process. But then towards the end, I found myself getting a little bit stuck. So I did use AI to fill in a couple of the gaps for me, in terms of, can you come up with an idea that would add weight to why this movement would happen? But I love the process. And, and I tried to get it down to one page when I found I could have written about, I could probably have written about 10,000 words.
Yeah.
I haven't rolled it out yet.
And I think like, so one thing I find, like you've written, I can't even, I've lost track of how many books, but it's probably half a dozen books or so. Is that about right?
Yeah, 7. Yeah, 7 books. Yeah.
Right. I think you're someone who takes your writing seriously. And I think when you talk about the use of things like AI and other types of tools, the first reaction is we're very skeptical because we're very protective of our own voice. And so it's almost like, I'm going to ask you for some ideas, but I actually don't believe you're going to come up with anything good. And you're like, and it's like, okay, there's one little thing I could potentially build on, but don't take that as a compliment. It's like, so I get it.
Well,
I think, yeah.
Yeah, with AI, I ask it, I'm very, very deliberate in my prompts, very, very deliberate. And it'll come up with something. I'm like, yeah, that's good, but it's not quite what I'm looking for. I'll take its idea, completely rework it and go, that was what I was looking for. But actually, it's still its idea.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to give it any credit
a,
whatsoever. Yeah.
This has come up maybe once before on the podcast. There's a researcher that I follow, and he talks through about like, there's this anomaly, I suppose, within our humans' ability to assess ideas, right? So we're all very good at generating ideas, and we're all very good at being critical of other people's ideas, but we're terrible at being critical of our own ideas. Like, and part of it is that a self-preservation piece about we need to be like there has to be a level of congruence in our understanding of the world that we can almost like live with ourselves. But in some ways, I find that sometimes AI serves that purpose. It's like, well, if I give the idea to you and then you give it back to me, I'm very comfortable being critical of you, or taking your idea and being critical and cherry picking pieces out of it. So I think that's not a bad technique to go through. But I think one of the things I find super interesting in this, and I when you first said the first version of this through, there was almost like this this place that you wanted to get to, and the question for me was, but how do we get there?
Mm-hmm.
Like almost like backcasting, how would we, what events would have to transpire for us to end up in this future that you describe? One where there is a very wholesale acceptance of analog technologies and almost like and it has to be a very voluntary thing in this scenario to me. Why would we voluntarily do this to ourselves? And this is probably the big question I struggle with throughout reading this. I was like, it has to be almost seismic. Like, and this is what I want to really talk to you about is what would the change be? Like you gave some examples. There's some really compelling research about the impacts of digital technologies on ourselves and on our thinking. We know there's a loneliness epidemic that's partly driven by social media driven isolation, right? All these things are true. We know them to be true. And yet somehow, I mean, it hasn't been seismic in its impact, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. For me, it's that case of it only takes one seed to make a forest, right? And I think what in my mind, what needed to happen was this exposure of the way social media companies are pretty much stealing our attention. One of the things that I really thought of when I was writing this is I had a conversation with a business leader, I think it was last year, Simon, and we were talking about this concept of different generations. And he's like, oh, I'm struggling really hard. And the point that I made was every generation tries to correct the mistakes of the past. And, this particular business leader said, oh, my teen is always on their phone. I'm like, well, yeah, because you gave them a phone really young. You're the role model for using the phone. And if everybody does that, then this is what happens. It's kind of, we get this effect where it spreads. But what if the opposite was true? What if we didn't give phones to our teenagers? Or what if we all agreed that that was what we were going to do? And so what would that one catalyst be? And the catalyst would be is a deliberate strategy from a mega company to really affect our children's attention, focus, mental health. And the social media, as I was writing it, the social media ban, the UK is considering it social media ban for teens, which started, of course, in Australia. And you start to see these things gathering momentum. And I thought, but what if we could get to parents and say, these companies are deliberately targeting your children, and you're the problem for giving your child a phone. And yeah, so that's, I think, when I was writing it, it was, what was that spark moment? And it was hard to make that weighty enough, Simon, if I'm being brutally honest. I was, yes, one research into TikTok, which I think was my scenario. But yeah,
Yeah,
no,
so
I agree.
this is part of what I found with this, right? Like, I love the future you describe. Like, we have these shared interests around analog and in real life and community and belonging. And these are things that we enact in our lives by choice. And we also probably get sucked into some of the other stuff, but we would probably like to think that we're a little bit more aware than the average in terms of this. And you describe an outcome that I find personally appealing. And so then I kind of go like, yeah, right, Cole. So how do we make this happen? Like, almost like, how could this really
Let's
transpire?
start this.
Let's do there's right. But there's a couple of things that came up for me. I read an article recently, and it was a professor of AI at Oxford University, and he wrote he did an annual lecture to the Royal Society. And there was an accompanying article in the Guardian, which I'll share in the show notes. But he talks about that the outcome of AI isn't guaranteed yet. It still may face what he describes as its Hindenburg moment. And obviously, the Hindenburg was at the time was considered the peak of air travel. Like, it was the most luxurious form of air travel you could possibly have. It was traveling between regularly transatlantic voyages. And it was seen as being the future of how we would get around, right? And then, one fiery ball of mistake and no one will touch a Zeppelin again. So there's this kind of, like, what he was explaining was, it may, and this is probably not dissimilar to you talk about the seed in the forest, but he goes, there may just be one thing that is so significant in its impact that people just go, well, I don't want that. And that potentially would have a knock-on impact for, for other types of digital technologies, like the social technologies and stuff that we grew up with. And I started going, okay, like, and you kind of allude to this in terms of that TikTok example and the seatbelt, like you described this. Was it the seatbelt? Yeah.
Seatbelt
What
moment,
do you mean by the seatbelt thing? Well, was there something in your mind particularly, or?
Well, yeah, well, it was Ford who first realized that road deaths could be dramatically reduced if everybody wore a seatbelt. And it completely changed the way that we thought about road safety. It was just like, oh my gosh, yeah, if we have a little piece of fabric that keeps the driver in the seat, it will fundamentally change the way that we think about safety. And it's the same with cigarettes. As soon as the research was published, categorically showing that cigarettes caused lung cancer, all of a sudden people stopped smoking. Well, not everybody, but a huge part of the population. It wasn't the health and well-being. It's crazy that it was sold as a health and well-being.
But that's why I go, like, I don't think, that research came out before I was a teenager. I spent some of my late teens and early 20s smoking. We are not necessarily fast to respond to something just because we know it's not good for us. In fact, what I took away from the tobacco thing was like, well, the real way that we stop people smoking is we tax the hell out of it. We make it so expensive. We're basically going, look, there is a social cost associated with this decision that you're making. There is a burden on our health system as a result of your choices. It's only fair that you now contribute back to that through a tobacco tax, right?
Also,
in
but also we're better at educating our children. So sorry to jump in. We're also better educating. My parents, they were of the generation. My dad smoked for 40 years. He only at the end did he understand, and he would say things like cigarettes are bad for you, cigarettes are bad for you, because I did the same thing, they're bad for you. Whereas now we're educating our children earlier, here's a list of the things that will kill you. So it's a different message. So yes, there's attacks, but also we're better at educating our children because we talk to them like adults from a much younger age now than used to happen when we were younger.
I do. So I go into this and where I can't share a couple of things that came up for me is like, what would be the catalysts? And one has actually come up while we're talking, but the first was, what if it's actually the opposite? What if AI is actually really good? Like, what if there is actually mass unemployment as a result of AI? And that's actually the thing where people who have been displaced by technology both can't afford, but also have this like almost like a mistrust of it. There's a future of hyperlocalism potentially, where suddenly because we're operating in hyperlocal type of situations, more like in the classic villages and small town type of mentality, I don't need emails so readily because the people I need to communicate with are around me. I'm not being booked to go fly off to Las Vegas to do a conference, right? I kind of work within my local community, but also even things like the sharing of vinyl and music like we did in our teens. It's almost like, what if this is actually not something that is a choice as a necessity? Now, I know that you framed this up very much as being a choice, but I almost wonder like, what would create the necessity? Because I find that some of the choices feel like really hard choices. Like I think about the parent going, do I not want to track my gosh safety? Or even more powerful to me was the example you used about the grandparents wanting to call with their kids. I can't imagine any grandparent volunteering going like, look, to be honest, I don't actually, maybe they just got terrible grandkids, but most of them would be like,
Could happen. Yeah.
Could happen. Yeah. Can you tell me what you think?
I mean,
like again, does that resonate with you at all? What push back against?
Oh yeah, totally. And actually, I went slightly the other way with the AI thing. I took it out eventually because too many words were because AI had failed. It caused economic collapse and global recession. As a result of the tech companies promising, basically, I demonized the technology companies throughout this scenario. But I did think about the alternate universe where AI was so good that it did put people out of jobs. And then there was this movement to sort of say, right, well, we need to reject everything that they're doing in order to kind of claim back what was ours. It was so difficult. It was like that Robert Frost poem, two roads diverge in the wood and I took the one less traveled by. It's like, well, what is the more likely scenario here? And both are littered with really, really difficult choices. I think the biggest challenge of all of this is the addiction that we have to smartphones right now. Is how do we unwind that? And that's the most difficult element of the scenario. I even look at my own brother who, dad's not well at the minute. He's on his phone all the time. And I'm like, what are you looking at? Oh, I'm reading at this and ChatGPT this and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, dude, put it down, But that's where we are, and I'm not saying that's bad. That's where we are. So yeah, that's the big challenge is what's the one thing that has to happen that really unwinds this? Yeah.
So, and so I should reiterate, like with this work, the objective isn't to describe the future. It's to describe a future to use that future as the basis of inquiry about, are we okay with the journey that we're on or the pathway on, and what would we change? What do we like and not like about the outcomes we get to? What are the unintended trade-offs and stuff that we might face? So I think the only thing that for me in my work, what I found to be true is like, if we describe a future that is so far out the realms of possibility, we kind of lose people in that where they kind of go, doesn't feel real to me. As long as we can sit on that side of like, how is this possible? And that's what I find so intriguing because I love the outcome. And it's like, show me the possibility of this. Now, I'll share the other thing that triggered for me when you were talking about this before, because I actually see another way we get to this future that is also incredibly powerful. You mentioned your son has gone down the path of the dumb phone and buying the DVDs. My daughter is not dissimilar. She hasn't got the dumb phone. She started collecting CDs. She goes, I can't really afford to collect vinyl, but I can collect CDs. She
Amazing.
found out that my mother-in-law used to have a video shop and still has a stash of DVDs under her house somewhere. And they're like, how do we get them all, right?
And now a word from our future sponsors.
You've had more speed, more choice, more convenience. But ultimately, it's just meant more overwhelm. At the 90s Superstore, we offer a carefully curated experience of stepping backwards. Enjoy music you can't skip, on devices you can't carry, with albums you have to listen to, in order. Try a phone attached to the wall, where privacy is non-existent and every call requires a whole family negotiation. And for the truly committed, pick up an outdated Melway, because getting lost and blaming the passenger should be part of every journey. Less control, less flexibility, less convenience, but definitely more nostalgic. The 90s Superstore, where everything is less.
I wonder whether or not ultimately we may respond to our children. Like they may actually say to us, hey, to be honest, Dad, don't really want to do the Skype call. Could we just catch up for coffee?
Mhm.
Right. Or can you just come and visit us, please? Like they may put an ask on us that is driven by their own beliefs in terms of, the power of in-person, the power of analog. And that I think as parents, we'd be like, okay, if that's what
Yeah,
you want, like,
let's do
we'll
it.
do it, right?
Yeah, I think the curiosity piece is the big one for me. I mentioned my son. One of the things that he said, he was just like, "Oh, I wish I'd been this age in the 1990s." And I wrote. I've got a blog. I think I'm publishing a blog tomorrow called Anamoya, and Anamoya it's a really interesting word, but it's about nostalgia for a time and place that one has never actually experienced, and we see a lot of this with Gen Z in the way that it's like cultural appropriation. They want to watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off. They want to listen to Led Zeppelin and the Smiths and all of these kinds of things, and I think. Where certainly for my own children, where they have that curiosity, I'm opening the door. I'm talking about all, being in my early 20s, growing up in Liverpool, where every single band that was popular played because the Beatles were from there. So you had to play. So I saw so many incredible bands. And, that curiosity about, what it would be to go to a live experience, what it would be to go to a live gig and not be seeing it through this kind of rectangular version. There's a joke, I can't remember which comedian said it, is about, so many parents are missing out on their kids' events because they're just staring at a video of them videoing it. And so I think, there is this curiosity that kids might have where they're just like, tell me, show me, take me. That actually reawakens it within us as well.
Yeah. So I just in the last week, we watched The Breakfast Club.
With
and I just literally took my daughter to basketball earlier, and the first song that she put on her playlist was "Boys Don't Cry" by The Cure, and I'm like, man, I am nailing parenting.
You are nailing it, mate. If nothing else, she has got the best tastes.
Yeah. So this is I really quite like this kind of tangent to go down. And the other thing this came up for me when you were talking about this, and describe, what was the word again? The nostalgia for things I've never experienced.
Anamoya.
Anamoya.
Yeah.
I think that we have been told, or we were told, that life just gets better. Like we grew up in the era where, in the 90s, I'm not saying that this, I mean, we may turn out that was the peak of civilization. We don't know that to be true or not true just yet. But we would look back on our parents' generation. We could see how, in terms of a lot of the signs around, improvements in the human condition, longevity, education standards, equality, all seem to have got better. And although it's, like the past to the future is never a straight line. We could see over time how things could get better. I think we were told that it would get better again. Like, and now I think there's people going like, did it? Like, has it? Or did we kind of suddenly break somewhere around, the year 2000, around the millennium, and somewhere around there we actually started to go, oh, hang on, whether it be through the power of big tech, pollution, climate change, we suddenly fear ourselves of actually almost being in a decline, right? So maybe this is also part of this. Maybe that, we no longer, or there's a generation, like a kid's generation, that no longer buy into the story that it just gets better. So I actually know that buying a house has got harder, right? My wages are stagnating, like all these things. And maybe that's also part of them going, okay, well, maybe we do need to go back a bit. Maybe we do actually have to retrace our steps a little bit and find out where that thing was, where we broke it.
Yeah, I think, especially for Generation X, millennials were the first to see. I've done a lot of research, obviously from a work perspective, on the different generations in the workplace. And what that led me, to really find was millennials were the first ones to go, oh, hang on a minute. The dream that you sold me about having my own place, 2 up, 2 down, little garden, yeah, that's not achievable for me. And actually what I'm seeing is a bigger wealth distribution gap. And of course, because we're living longer, unlocking that wealth. So traditionally, when parents pass on, they would pass their property, the wealth associated with that, to their children. Obviously, that's taking longer and longer. So it is a bit of a lie. And by the time you get to Generation Z, they're like, I want what you had that you talk about. I want the place. You bought your first house in your early 20s, your mid 20s. I want that. And I want to be able to go on holiday, and I want to have disposable income. But I can't, because the gap between the wage that I earn and the cost to get on the first rung of the property ladder is so huge that it's just impossible. So I'm going to stay with you. Now, of course, the knock-on effect then for Generation X parents, and then and soon for millennial parents, is we bear the cost of not only the child care, young adult care, but also the aged care of our aging parents in terms of money and in terms of time. And so it's almost, for Generation Z and then Generation A, they're almost having to redefine what it means. It is that Robert Frost poem, and they are taking the path less traveled by, because for the best part of 100 years post-industrial revolution, life got better and better. And of course, you had the world wars where everything dipped, but then post-World War II, Simon, everything improved. Everything improved for that generation. And it's only post-global financial crisis where actually that wealth distribution gap just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The quality of life really isn't the same for Generation X, millennials, Generation Z, soon to be Generation A. So there is a redefinition probably that's required.
You also reckon there's something, I know this is maybe just sitting just around the edge or just outside the edge of this scenario, but I remember, or I feel like what I saw as I grew up were some of the failings, or the early failings of the consumer-driven individualistic culture that kind of dominates the Western sphere. That we saw, I saw parents who were, successful, had disposable income and a nice house. And at the same time, there wasn't necessarily a sense of life satisfaction that you would expect that came with it. That in some ways, often, like, we build an identity around consumption that leads to more consumption, or something like that. We see, my last guest on the podcast, Kath, is like, she remembers living in a commune when she was in like her late teens, early 20s. She's now gone back to living in a commune again. Now, this one's a much nicer commune where there's like shared barbecue areas and it's in a city area, right? But that sense of community is like, oh, we just need to be around each other. We need that sense of social connection. There's a little bit you talk about in this about the reinvigoration of the pub as a social, like a place in kind of community. But I wonder, like in this story of analog, is there also a story? Do you touch on in any way in your own thinking around this kind of individualism and the consumerist stuff, or is that kind of just outside of the sphere?
It's just outside of it, but I considered it because one of the things that we've done over the last kind of 10, 15 years as we raise our children is we've raised them to be more individualistic. We're more asset obsessed than we've ever been before. Our parents wanted the house, the kitchen, in the UK, the conservatory, in Australia, the pool. Now we're raising our kids to be way more individualistic. Is you need to get what you need, what's important for you. And I'm not saying that's completely wrong, but it's driven a particular way of thinking. And so, we saw it in work where all of a sudden millennials got into work and as parents were like, oh, find a company that, shares the values that you have, find a job that really lights you up. When I was growing up, it was get a job. And if you get a job, you're really lucky to have a job. And so I really thought about how would that play into this scenario. And again, it all comes back to upbringing. It all comes back to messaging and really thinking about the stories that we share with our own children and the expectations that they have. Millennials, a great example of that is they got into the workplace and realized that what their parents had told them was a bit of a lie. And most companies, especially their cultures, are just a bit rubbish. They're really rubbish, and they're designed to make the people at the top more powerful, richer, and the people at the bottom do more for longer. And so this is where we had the creation of the gig economy. And then there was the, kind of complete media story rage about, oh, it's the gig economy, it's all about the gig economy. And then we realized that actually there's a saturation point for that. And so, it all comes back to messaging about what's important for you as an individual, but also what you can gain in terms of quality of life from the community around. Simon. And of course, COVID, the pandemic, I chose not to mention pandemic mainly because it's still triggering, but I chose not to mention it because of course, what that did is it drove us to really think about us as ourselves rather than the community at whole. And it really changed the culture, and not just in kind of social service, but also things like education as well. So this is why I felt I could have written 10,000, 15,000 words on this.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting, which you just kind of touched on as well. There's this kind of relationship between individualism and this perception of the need to be independent. Because I'm such an individual, and success is I'm so self-sufficient, I don't even need to ask for help. And again, that is, well, if I don't ever ask, like I've always believed, I have this really strong belief that some of the best relationships or friendships we'll ever create will create in our kind of late teens and early 20s, because we all need help and we've all got time to give. So when a friend goes, I need to move house, I don't suppose you could possibly give us a hand, but like, I had nothing to do on Saturday. Of course I'll give you a hand. And they're like, oh my God, Cole, you have saved my life. And you're just like, pay me with some beer. I'm okay, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
We play this game out over and over again. They need help, you offer, they offer. And we get to this point 4 or 5 years later and go like, man, you're like the best friend. I am so indebted to you for the rest of my life. And you're sitting there going like, no, I'm indebted to you, right? There's this asymmetry between the ask and the give. Now, we get to this later point in our life where we feel we have to be so independent. And it's like, actually, this friend of mine, Ben, who a couple of years ago for his birthday, he was like, look, all I want for my birthday is I just want some people to come around and give me a hand to do some gardening at my house. And I was like, I'll be there, no problem at all. And like he invited maybe a dozen people, maybe 6 people turned up for this gardening event. And we worked our asses off for the morning, just like, whatever you need, dude. He's got this big block, like it's a 3,000 square meter block, and it was overrun. But it got to 1 o'clock and he's like, right, tools down. I was like, dude, there's still way more to do. He goes, no, we're done. Lunch is served. He put on the most incredible lunch. Like the lunch would have cost more than hiring the gardeners.
Yeah.
Right? It was like seafood and oysters and wine. It's like, no. Now we just hang out and have fun, right? It was really, though, about trying to create this opportunity for us to give and like help and receive that I feel is really missing in it's almost like society's become very transactional.
Mhm.
I think in this, one thing I definitely see in this future is what we are forcing people to be more in person in the way they interact and socialize. We're not going to be doing this, obviously. If we were doing the podcast recording, there'd be no podcast, but we'd be doing this as a conversation in front of a small group of people around a campfire,
That's right.
right? That's the closest we'd get to a podcast. And if you weren't one of the 20 people around that campfire that night, like, you could only ever hear about it.
Right. Yeah. I did a speech for a football organization in Switzerland last year, Simon. And I said, and we recorded it in a studio. And I said, are we recording it and then sending it to people? And they were like, no, we've taken the decision that if you don't watch the live recording, you miss out. And I thought, wow, 5 years ago, we would never have done that. It was one thing for everybody, but it was a case of, right, well, if you miss it, you miss out. And so I think you see these little pockets every now and again. And I think, people thought conferences were dead. If you remember immediately post-COVID, people are never going to want to come back together. I spoke at a conference last year where it was like 7,500 people. It was huge. It was absolutely huge. And I said to one person, what's the thing you enjoyed most? And they were like, being around this many people. Now, I'm not saying we want to do that.
You were just fishing
all
for
of
a
the
compliment that
time.
you're hoping they were going to go, well, you, Cole, you were the best thing.
Yeah, you were the best. We hope you speak at every conference and that they pay you more every year. Yeah, no one ever says that.
Yeah,
But,
so one thing I've had a really strong belief about with the conference thing, just as while you're on that, like one of the things I noticed post pandemic, if we just to mention just briefly, is that the first thing that happened was we wanted much more smaller and intimate events. That pre-pandemic, 1,000 people in a room was kind of de rigueur. Like, in fact, if you weren't going to sell 1,000 tickets, you probably couldn't put this thing on. I see a lot more events now that are more like 50 to 100 people. And again, it's almost like I did one last week for HP. They were in Melbourne for the Grand Prix. What they put on for 50 people was insane. They had mock-ups of the tech setup in pit lane and, what it would be like if you were at the track. And they did all of this for 50 people because they just wanted 50 people to feel really special. And I think there's something about that in this concept as well. It's like, yeah, but we've almost got used to the idea that we can have everything and therefore nothing actually matters. Like, we divide our attention across so many little things that we can't actually anywhere be clear what was the thing that actually defined us and mattered to us. Where suddenly, like me buying records for my girls, it's like, yeah, but you can only have one record for your birthday. So now I have to slave over making sure I get exactly the right one. Because this is now there's almost like identity attached to this thing.
yeah.
And I think how, I really, that just lights me up, by the way, the idea that we are forced to choose. I know that sounds like the ultimate anti-consumer sentiment, but it's kind of true, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is. I spoke to an event organizer, Simon, and I said, how does it feel to be putting on these events? And anyway, long story short, they said, oh, we have to really focus on the value that we offer more than we ever did before. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's a good thing, right? But, to speak to your point is they were just used to putting stuff on rather than really thinking what's the value to the person that we're delivering this to. And it's the same when it comes to, I need to save for this one thing. What's the value that I'm going to get from this thing? Instead of having access to everything all of the time, and for me, YouTube Music, Netflix, Amazon Prime, I have Sky Sports here, can watch all of the sports. What if I had to pick just one? What if I just said, right, it's just one thing? I would really look for what's going to give me the greatest value, what's going to make me feel good about me. And I just love that idea because it kind of takes me back to a time, of course, when I was growing up. But there was a lot that was rubbish when I was growing up. Definitely wasn't safe like it is now. There was a lot of social unrest. But I think really working hard for something and making the choice about, well, what's the value it gives me. That's something that I would love to see return, definitely.
Yeah. And this is, look, I mean, again, if you look at this kind of scenario in its entirety, I think the very first comment I wrote after reading the whole thing was, how much of this is nostalgia, right?
Mm.
And how much of this is like a genuine, like exploration of a future, right? And I think there's a real, I suppose, the risk, two middle-aged white guys on a podcast, shouting at clouds, going, "I wish we could," it's like
Who love
like,
vinyl? Yeah,
yeah, I know, right? And yet, so I think as you were saying earlier, although we can look back, or we can take some of this back, right? And there's value in doing so. There has to be almost like a very discerning conversation around, well, what wouldn't you take back? What would you keep from the present? What would you willingly get rid of? And again, I think that list you gave around tracking your kids. How do you feel about that one? The grandparents being able to communicate with their like, if we're assuming that this is driven by choice, it's like, where do we actually see genuine value in some of the technology tools we now have access to? And Google Maps was another really interesting one.
yeah,
It's like, guys, so many people, like if you told them, actually, no, we're going back to, what do they call over here? Like, the map books, the Melway, it's called in Melbourne. It's like, if you go, going back to the Melway, I think there'll be people like, there's no way, like that bit I'm not compromising on. It's like, okay, cool. So we can have the navigator in our car. That is okay, but it will not be on your phone. You can't leave with it. All right. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you asked the question, how much of it is nostalgia? Probably 50-50, I would say. And the reason it's 50-50 is, I still talk about the fact that the 90s was the last great decade. I still talk about this, particularly when I'm with my friends who also share that same, I spent 3 days at a music festival where literally no one was on a phone. It was all about beer and music. I'm like, oh, it's like the good old days. Looked around, it was all people that looked like me. But also, I read that book sale. If you remember when the Kindle first came out, everyone's like, that's the death of book sales. That's it. In physical book, physical book sales still account for 60 to 70% of all book sales, particularly here in the UK. The rise of DVDs, the rise of vinyl. So I think there is this. I think people are looking for a balance, and I think we'll start to see some rejection of smartphones and just the invasive nature of them. I could envisage a time where navigation tools are built into cars, where TVs, I remember the first smart TV I had, it had a little camera on the top and you could do video calls from the TV. So some of those kind of tools, but it wasn't everything in your pocket all the time. Like the camera's a great one. I love having a camera in the phone. Not that I'm, I've really rejected social media over the last probably 18 months. And it was as a result of reading Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, which I highly recommend. But I do love having the camera. My daughter is in the military. She recently passed off. Yes, I could have had a big bulky thing around my neck, but it was just dead easy having the camera in my pocket. It's just to point and shoot,
Yeah. So I think this is probably, when we kind of do this type of work, like this scenario type of work, we often we before we do it, we often have very shorthand views of the future. And those shorthand views tend to be like all or nothing. It's like what you described with the books. It's like, oh, the Kindle came out. Well, books are dead.
Yeah.
Like we can't envision a future where we have some books and some digital books, or ebooks. We kind of like our shorthand, our quick response is the trajectory is towards more ebooks. This doesn't end until all books are gone. And then we find out that's actually not true. There's much more nuance in it. People keep these things for different reasons. I think one of the things when I do this work with clients, when we talk about trends, one of the things we talk about, is there sometimes not even clear directionality? We don't know if the future is more of this or less of this. But even if there is directionality, we can only imagine more or a lot more. there is still a space for us to explore between more and a lot more about what those different worlds look like. And so although I think this is what I really take it from this scenario is, first of all, what is that big driver of change that would create this type of cultural shift or accelerate this cultural shift? Because I agree with you. I think there are signs it's already happening. But for it to be embodied on a collective scale and an intergenerational scale, I think there has to be a catalyst for it to happen. And I think that catalyst has to be bigger than just a couple of research reports. It has to be like the Hindenburg moment, or it has to be the something that is like, oh, wow, okay, like, no, this is not going the right way, right? The second thing I take out of this is I love how you pushing thinking, I like pushing our thinking around, like, what would we be really just so happy to embrace again? And so many of the things are very idealistic around, we'd be back at the pub. Obviously, we wouldn't be all drinking alcoholic drinks anymore because our younger generation not into that, but there'll be a full selection of kombucha on tap and all the rest of it. But we would be back there socializing in real life with people. But there's other ones where it's also asking us to explore these bigger questions is, so you run your business on email, I run my business on email, and we have a website, and we kind of rely on how will people contact us? Are we doing that via letter, or do like they're the things that we're going to have to really dig into? But I love that the scenario sets us up to do so.
And we're still using email. We still have our laptops, our PCs. It's just the everything device in the pocket that we've lost. But yeah, they are definitely the trade-offs that we would need to consider, that we would need to make. And like I said, I very much came from the it takes one seed to make a forest. But I do agree that social movements are usually built on one big moment or one really courageous, curious individual that starts us thinking completely differently about the way that we do things.
Yeah, I think we will undoubtedly learn a lot from the younger generations in this. Like, I think if we're willing to forgo like this kind of intergenerational belief that we're somehow meant to be the teachers and they're the students, and
Right.
accept that they can also be the teachers. I definitely see parts of that. I think my girls still struggle sometimes with certain aspects of social, but there's an awareness that they have about them in terms of some of it's like already choosing to push back, like pushing back early. And I don't remember necessarily us doing that when, like, I was very happy to embrace CDs. I was like, whoa, it's great. Like, in mini discs, there we are, mini disc players. I was like, I could take all this music with me to the UK when I traveled. Yeah. So this has been super interesting. I know that I'm going to continue to ruminate on this for a while. And I'll be like, yes, how do we make this happen, Cole? How do we
How do we start this social movement so that in 2035 it all started with the podcast?
What if we wanted all the listeners to be on board with our social movement, what would we ask them to do? What would be like, is there like a simple, like what would be a simple shift that people would make or could make that sets them off on this journey with us?
Well, it starts with really cherishing your focus, your attention, and really seeing that time away from something that just sucks the life out of us is time well spent. I've gone back to reading magazines and papers, and I feel it's reduced my anxiety in terms of this need to always be on. It's reconnected me. The point that I made about going out walking and running and listening to the birds. So I now do that. I don't listen to music or podcasts. I listen to the birds when I run in the morning, which I think is fabulous. And it's to find ways to cherish all that's good that isn't driven by a piece of machinery in our pocket. And if you can do that for half a day at a weekend, I'd spend at least a week a year where I take a digital break, and I look forward to it every year. I suppose it's to do that.
Yeah, I think that's some of the stuff is super simple. As I said, I've probably made the same shift. I used to always listen to music when I ran, and now it's like, oh no, just be at one with your thoughts or be at one with the nature. One other thing that I've also found recently, so I think everybody knows the advice: don't sleep with your phone in the same room. And I've been fairly like rigid about that. My phone charger is in my office. That's where my phone goes. It doesn't go into the bedroom. But the thing I've noticed recently is I find myself now not getting it until the last moment possible. So I'll wake up, I'll make breakfast with the girls, I'll go have a shower. There'll be a point though somewhere around 8:36 or 7, and I'm suddenly going, okay, now I've got to pick it up. Like I've got to I've got to check the first thing I've got to do today, and I'm using it for my calendar and things like that, right? But I almost like enjoying the first couple of hours of the day without having it on me. Um, and again, all these things I just feel really subtle and small shifts. But I think in doing so, it reminds you of what it's like to not have that constant, like it's almost like an energy attached to it, isn't it?
It is, and it's an energy drain, or it can be an energy drain. So I do the same as you. I mean, it's the last thing that I do, and often I find I get, if I'm not delivering, I'll get to lunchtime and I'll realize the phone is still in the office, but I'm on the laptop working. I use app timers on my phone to really change my habits. So I get the digital report every day, and for me, it's got to be less than 2 hours. And, the bulk of the time is spent using something that adds value to my life or adds value to the work that I do, which is things like listening to a podcast. But I just want to quickly jump back because I liked what you said about seeing the generations educators. Two of my favorite newsletters one's written by a millennial, one's written by Gen Z, because it educates me on the world that's happening now, not the world that I'm attached to. I think we're still, particularly Generation X, we're still tied to generational roles. I'm the parent, I teach you, and gender roles. And I think that's changing now. And I think we have to allow that to happen. We have to sit in the discomfort of it, allow it to happen, and really start to observe and listen. And that then will give us these curiosity pathways for us to, I don't know, find different ways to enjoy the rest of the life that we have ahead of us.
Mm. We are almost out of time, which is, it feels like this hour has gone super quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we go, I've always found like I have such smart and interesting friends to invite onto this podcast. And yet many are like you and they say, I've never really done something like this before. And for me, these are really powerful ways of opening up our minds to a conversation or ideas that we may not otherwise pursue. Like the whole Daniel Kahneman thing, that thinking fast and slow is by default. We use our fast brain. We just play out the patterns of the past. And this is very much about, no, step back. Let's think bigger and deeper about this topic than perhaps either of us have thought about it before. Having gone through that process, is there anything that has shifted for you or that you will take away as a result of either the research you did or the conversation we've had?
The first thing, Simon, and this, I really, really enjoyed this, is disassociating myself from the current. And I know that sounds like escapism, like, oh, let's just ignore everything that's going on in the world because most of it is really, really bad. But by disassociating myself from the current, it allowed me to really see how I could craft a different future for myself, which sounds like the most obvious statement, because every motivational speaker in the world everywhere says, oh, you can be different tomorrow if you just did one thing differently. But often what we do is we focus on what we do currently, not what that future vision looks like. And so I really, really, really enjoyed that. So instead of starting from the current and saying, what can I change now? Very much, what can the future me do, see, look like, all of these kinds of things. So I really enjoyed that as part of the process. And then secondary, which obviously links to my work around culture, is really understanding social dynamics. So a lot of my own research, a lot of my work fed into the scenario, but really thinking about those social dynamics and what creates movement. I read a statistic a couple of years ago where it only takes 15% of a people, whatever size that is, who are determined to create change to actually create change. It only takes 15% of a people, and that's what then spawns that change. It really got me thinking about social change, the catalyst for social change. And so I really enjoyed that part of it too, because anthropology, once you start digging into kind of anthropology and human history and all these, there's about 1 million rabbit holes you can go down. So I went down a few to write the scenario.
Yeah, there's just two things that I pick up. So there is something, and again, I'm not sure who shared this with me. It was many years ago when we were talking about futures work. There is a point in the future, somewhere about 3 to 5 years away, where we stop seeing the future as just a continuation of the present and we see it as something else. And as soon as we cross that threshold into something else, we allow ourselves to not see it as being ours, but we get to take a third person perspective on it. And we get to be in some ways more critical and more deep. Like we don't take it, we don't see. I think when you talk about, well, you can be different tomorrow, there's a sense of blame in that or self-preservation in that. It's like, which means there's something wrong with you now, Colin.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas when it's 3 to 5 years, it's no longer you, it's just this thing. So I think that's one thing I heard. And I think you alluded to this idea of what the concept of backcasting. Let's imagine what we would like. Let's then work backward from that point and say, what would actually have to take place for us to go from where we are now to that point? But rather than move forward from now, we actually go backwards from that point and go, this would have to occur, and before that, this would have to occur. And again, it's a very powerful technique of being able to kind of go, yeah, how would you shape a social movement like this? So I'm really glad that that's like what you took out of it. And again, I think for me, what I'm going to take out of this is that this shift is happening. It's probably, if I go, that idea of like, will we have more of this or less of this? Is it directional? It's like, no, I think it's definitely more or more, right? It's definitely going to be something that we are going to embrace. It feels like a growing backlash against like big tech. There is a growing frustration, like most people aren't actually active on social networks anymore, but they haven't actually worked out that the thing they need to replace it with is in real life connection. So in some ways, I probably leave this conversation with a real sense of hope. That's like, oh yeah, and keep buying my kids vinyl, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great investment. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know this, and they probably won't. Oh, sorry, you go.
No, I was going to say that the last thing that I'd say, again, picking up on and this way these conversations always go. I think we already know what's harming us. We already know what kind of would give us greater value in our lives and help us to live more fulfilling lives. And then we're often told, speakers like us, oh, the gap is between knowing and acting. And actually, the gap is envisaging the future. And, really shooting for that. And that doesn't mean that we reject everything like I play out in the scenario. It means that we embrace the things that add value and we focus only on the value that they can add. But there's space for everything within that, Simon, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Hey, mate, this has been such a joy talking to you. I'm glad that we, are still in the present where this type of technology is acceptable. And we could do this. The alternative would also be great if we were around the campfire with 20 other friends having this conversation. But I fear that it wouldn't have happened quite so quickly if that was the requirement. And,
I agree.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for sharing or putting the energy into this and sharing your insights. And as a friend, it's just an absolute joy to spend time with you.
You too, my friend. Honestly, this has been so much fun to do. And then I get to speak to you at the end of it. It's been fabulous. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks again to Cole for been with us, and we'll be back with another episode of The Future with Friends very, very soon. Till then. Well, that is all for this week's episode of The Future with Friends. If you've enjoyed the episode and you want to support the show, the number one thing you can do is share it with your friends. In fact, it would give me no greater joy than to think in a small way the conversations I'm having with my friends could be a positive influence on the conversations that you are having with yours. Other ways to support the show include going onto the podcasting platform of your choice and giving us a rating. Obviously, I would like it to be 5 stars, but you should ultimately do whatever feels right for you. And if you don't feel quite ready for that yet, if we're not at that point in our relationship, the other thing you can do is send me small gifts in the mail. I always enjoy receiving them. Well, that is all for this week. We will be back in another couple of weeks with the next episode. And so until then, my friends, I look forward to seeing you again.